I'd like to focus on just two of the things Jesus says in this gospel. It's Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 6, and then verses 16 through 18. And when he says twice, when you give alms, and then three times he mentions that the Father will repay you when you act according to these guidelines, these thoughts of alms and prayer and fasting. What we have translated here in English as when you give alms, I discovered through a wonderful, very thorough meditation on the Gospel of Matthew by a Trappist monk from out in the East Coast. His name is Father Simeon. The title of it is Fire of Mercy, Heart of the Word. If you want to try to remember that, or go back later and listen to the audio of the homily through the parish website. So heart of mercy, fire of the Word. And he points out that in the Greek of this passage, the word that is we translate as giving alms, that phrase, is a word that you could paraphrase as it's saying being mercy-minded. All right, so it's more to do with a state of mind and an attitude and a temperament and a disposition than just the mere act of giving money to the poor or to the needy, but to be mercy-minded. We have asked God to be mercy-minded toward us in the responsorial psalm. Be merciful, O Lord, for we have sinned. And so Father Simeon points out that to be mercy-minded and then to do the actions that flow from such mercy-mindedness, that is one way that we are godly. One way, to hearken back to my homily, those of you who are regular parishioners, homily from this past couple of weekends on asking God to help us be more like Him, to fulfill the design that humans were made for in the image and likeness of God, to be mercy-minded is to be like God, to be more like God, and to fulfill your fundamental reason to exist, which is to enact and embody being in the image and likeness of God. And what might be some examples of how God is mercy-minded toward us? We hear this from the first reading, from the prophet Joel, chapter 2, verses 12 through 18. God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, rich in kindness. And the prophet says, perhaps God will leave behind him a blessing. So among other things, of all the countless ways and the combinations and permutations of how each of us can be fulfilling our image and likeness of God, among those things, Prophet Joel, this portrait of God, gracious, slow to anger, rich in kindness, and leaving blessings behind. I invite each of us to ask the Lord to show you how perhaps your Lenten project can be, as it were, a Lenten project, right? Lenten resolution. Asking God to help you be more mercy-minded and have some sober assessment of who you need to be mercy-minded toward. And ask the Lord that by any encounter with you, whether in person or over the phone or through an email or a text or whatever it might be, a social media posting, that you will leave blessings behind you. That people walk away from either talking with you on the phone or in person, or getting a letter or a note or a text message, or seeing something on your social media feed or whatever else, that they will say, man, that was a real blessing to hear that, to read that, to be with that person. Be mercy-minded is also then to be more tender-hearted. So as again, back to the prophet Joel, as he says, rend your hearts and not your garments. I think we all probably know in the ancient world, they had that symbolic gesture if someone was really upset or was trying to show that they were sorrowful, or they would, literally rip their top or something, or rip off some clothes to show that they would rend it. So to say rend your heart might be to say, rip your heart open so that God can pour more of his life into your heart. St. Paul elsewhere says, hope does not disappoint because the love of God has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. So this Lent, you may want to think about ripping open your heart so there's more room for God to pour his Holy Spirit into your heart, to grow to be tender-hearted and mercy-minded. If we do that, then the mercy of God can then flow out from us to others. And we will leave behind us a blessing. We will be rich in kindness toward other people. We will be slow to anger. And what Father Simeon goes on to suggest in his meditation is that when we let the godliness flow out from us, God is always there to replenish and to pour more of his love into us, more of his life into us. And that's what Father Simeon suggests as a way to think of what it means for God to repay you, is he'll give you more of godliness to refill your tanks, so to speak, so that then more can flow out from you. You might consider an example would be, if in the perspective of, say, giving money, literally giving money to the poor, if you give money to the poor so that then you've got less cash, but then somebody else gives you that same amount of money back, in a sense repaying you for the kindness you've shown to the other person. But more profoundly and richly, Father Simeon is suggesting when we give of the godliness in ourselves to others, when we let mercy flow from out of our hearts, which God has made more tender, and from our minds, when we, in a sense, give away the godliness in us, God repays us by constantly giving more of himself to us, more of his life, more of his love. So I invite you to make that perhaps a Lenten resolution, however that might work itself out practically for you. Asking God to help you, opening your heart so that God can tenderize it, and God to flood and saturate your mind so that you may be more mercy-minded.